We're going to talk about how to solve absolute value inequalities where the sign is a less than sign. So first let's take a look at the inequality absolute value of x is less than 4. Let's talk about some different numbers that would work here. If I plugged in, say, 0, the absolute value is 0, that's less than 4. So 0 would be a number that would work. 1 would work because the absolute value of 1 is 1, and that's less than 4. And the same would go for -1 because if I took the absolute value of -1, that's 1. And we see that this pattern continues for 2 and for 3, and -2 and -3. So these are some of the values. And really, I could get specific and say, well, it would also work for -2.5, or really anything sort of in between here. Okay. What about if I skip over to the number 5? Well, 5 is absolute value is 5. It's not less than 4, so 5 is not going to work. Would 4 work? Is 4 less than 4? It's not less than 4, but any numbers that come really stinking close to 4 would work, like 3.999, which is almost 4. So just like we did before when we graphed inequalities, we did something like this. So I'm going to say all of the numbers up to 4 and all of the numbers up to -4, those are all going to work. It doesn't include the number -4 and it doesn't include the number +4, but everything in between. This is what our graph would look like. So to generalize our results, we'd say any number that's between -4 and +4 would work. So this is one way to write that, or we could also write that -4 to +4 with our open brackets. So these are different ways to write the correct answer. Well, let's take a look at what that means algebraically. Algebraically, what we're asked to do is write it the first time just as it is. So x is less than 4, so just like we did when it was an equal sign or an equation. And the second time I wrote it as x equals -4, but this is now an inequality. So instead of less than, I'm going to write greater than -4. Just like when you multiply by a negative, you flip the inequality. It's the same concept. And here, I'm going to write an and in between. Now what an and means, and this is specific to anything that starts out as a less than. So here's my less than sign right here. So in a less than, we're saying it has to both be a number that is less than 4 and a number that is greater than -4. Because if I graphed x is less than 4, that would be looking like this and shaded in this direction. Ooh, that was a crazy line. And this one would look like this and be shaded in this direction. And so if I said either one of them would work, then my entire graph would be shaded in. Everything would either be less than 4 or greater than -4. That's all of the numbers that exist. But this is an and question. An and question says it has to fit both of those criteria. So only the parts here where both of them would be shaded, which we had already figured out on other graph, looks like this. That's what our graph would look like. This is the way we would write that with an and in between. Preferably, we would write -4 is less than x is less than +4. So where did that come from? I took this inequality and flipped it to make it -4 is less than x, and then I simply combined those two together. So this went here, and this went here. That's all we did. Let's try another. For this question, before I can write it twice, I've got this +4 in the way. So here's my original. Absolute value of y minus 15 plus 4 is less than 23. I can't write it 2 times until I get that absolute value alone. That gives me the absolute value of y minus 15 is less than, so we always look for that sign, less than 19. And this time I'm going to write it a little bit differently. Instead of using the word and, I'm going to write it as a compound inequality. So I'm going to pop over here to the left, and I'm going to write -19 is less than y minus 15 is less than 19. So I took this, I dropped the absolute value, and I made the negative value at the beginning. So now I can just solve one time and get both of my answers. So I'm going to add 15 to all three spaces here. Here I get -4 is less than y is less than 34. That is my solution. Now, it asked me to write this answer in a couple of different ways. So it says solve this, write the answer using set builder notation. So set builder notation would be all of the y's such that -4 is less than y is less than 34. That would be the way we would write that in set builder. And in interval notation, we would write it all of the numbers from -4 to +34, but not including either of those values. This one they didn't ask us to graph, so I'm not going to graph it. This one we're going to solve and graph. So first thing I'm going to do again is add that 8, because I have to get the absolute value alone before I do anything else. 12 plus 8 is 20. That's when I'm going to check my sign. So now I've got a less than question. Again, the easiest way to write that is with the -20 first, is less than x plus 4 is less than +20. I solve by subtracting 4 from all three positions, which gives me -24 is less than x is less than 16. This one they want me to graph the solution set, but they didn't give me a graph. So we're just going to take the easy way out here. Make sure that -24 is to the left because that's the smaller number, and the +16 is to the right of that because that's the larger number. The less than implies that -24 is not included, so that's going to be the open bracket, and then to the 16 open bracket, and again this is a less than, so it has to fit both of those criteria, which means it's between those two values. So that is how we would graph that answer. Try this one on your own, then press play to see how you did. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to divide each side by 3 because I want the absolute value alone. So that gives me 2x minus 5, still in the absolute value, is less than 7. So this is when I check my inequality, and it is a less than. So I am going to write it as -7 is less than 2x minus 5 is less than 7. Now again, notice I didn't take it out of the absolute value brackets until I wrote it twice, or wrote it as a compound inequality in this way. I'm going to add 5 to all three places. -2 is less than 2x is less than 12. Divide by 2 in all three places. -1 is less than x is less than 6. To graph, I would go, from -1 to +6. It does not include either of those values, but it would shade in between.